comics have title text? Oh, in the book? Is there one that's missing the title text? Is this? That's a two-part. So the title text is attached to the second half of it. Oh yeah, I was panicking for a second there. I think that we got the title text on. Yeah, for a long time, the Wikipedia article on XKCD, I noticed that it said almost all of the comics have title text attributes. Just do this. And I always wondered why the almost all, because there's a database and we have title text attributes for all of them. Although there's one, or I think there are two where it's just an ellipsis. So maybe that's what they were thinking of.
Or maybe they just didn't go and read everyone.
That doesn't sound like the people who write Wikipedia articles. Yeah. Well, oh yeah?
How does it feel to be the trendsetter with the title text? I've heard now.
Oh, sorry?
When you started doing XKCD, you were the only comics that I saw on the internet that was doing title text like that. Other than that, it was a duplicate of the title of the comic. Since then, I've seen at least a dozen others that are doing another joke in the alt text.
So, like, a lot of the time, the people who one person thinks is the trendsetter is actually the one who thinks that they're following the trend, and the other people think they're following. For me, I only added it because I saw a bunch of other comics doing it and thought it was cool. Dinosaur Comics was doing it, A Softer World was doing that, and Achewood was doing that. And those were three that I read, pretty regularly. I think the only one that I read much that didn't do that at that time was Penny Arcade. So I was just doing it because the other guys were doing it. I started doing it around comic 50 or so, and every comic before that, I wrote all of those title texts in one sitting. I just went through and added title text for all the previous comics. But it's really a competitive measure because, first of all, people read all the way through the archive, and then they discover the title text by accident, and then they have to read through again. So then they've got my comics firmly implanted in their brain. Everyone else they've read just once. The other thing is that the idea is that when they go to another comic that doesn't have title text, they'll read it, they'll get the punchline, they'll feel good, and then they'll mouse over, and then they'll wait for a second, and either the title comic will appear, or I think in more of the cases just nothing appears, and they have to wait for it for a moment. There's this long drawn-out thing, and then there's this hit with disappointment, and the dopamine just stops flowing, and the enjoyment disappears, and then they go back to my comic. But I mean, and it's fun to have it in there. And one thing I do try to do though is I assume that most people are not reading the title text, so I try never to lean on it to explain the joke or like to patch up something that and I didn't make it, because it feels like I always feel like there's that urge. Anytime you do this, you're like, oh, someone won't understand this. I want to explain it in this. But that with comics, that urge is one of the things that's hardest to resist, but that's most important to resist. That it's sort of like telling a joke and be like, these guys go into a bar and they do that and say this and do this, and then the guy says this. Oh, and the first guy was a rabbi. You're like that. If you have something you feel like you need to include after the punchline like that you should rework it to include that beforehand. Is there a question? Oh, sorry. I don't know if you were raising your hand or agreeing.
Do you have a favorite one in the book?
I don't know, because there are ones that were very early on that I'm sentimental about, and I don't know how much, I remember drawing this, I don't know whether I'm looking at it, because I've looked at them for so much longer than the other ones. I don't know whether I'm evaluating them fairly. I think one of the early ones that when I drew it, I was like, this is my favorite thing that I've drawn so far. I think it was somewhere around comic number. I did not include the comic numbers in the book. I went back and forth on that. But I like not having too much extra stuff and stuff to add in. The one about the guy who's looking for that one girl who travels everywhere by the MC Hammer slide. I like that one a lot.
Did you really see the girl that did that?
I see that girl every time I close my eyes. Back and forth across my vision. Making the sort of typewriter noise each time she stops and then moving back the other way. I think So I read somewhere that dance move is actually called the typewriter, but I couldn't find any corroboration on Wikipedia or something. But I think that like when MC Hammer did it, it was like he's doing the typewriter. Anyone ever heard that? No? All right, it seems plausible. I mean, that sort of back and forth. It looks like a typewriter cartridge. Or I don't know. And then there were some reasons. I was happy with the one that I ended the book with the experiment with the shark, where the shark gets lifted up by the balloon, and I was imagining that one. I read about an actual study where they did this, except for the balloons. But they did tag sharks. I think they were. They might have been whale sharks that were disappearing, or possibly gray whites. They were disappearing for like 4 months every year, and they couldn't figure out where they went. And so they tagged these sharks in like the Atlantic and the Northern Caribbean. They found they were actually going down to the coast of South America and just chilling like 500 feet down off the shore of Colombia, or the shore of Venezuela and Colombia, and they just stayed there. But they mentioned they didn't have the budget for like really good tags, and they were going down so deep that the tags couldn't transmit. So they just designed them to pop off and float to the surface and then be recovered. And I was just imagining more and more sort of hacked together recovery mechanisms. What might go wrong? Are there any other questions? Back there?
What's your favorite webcomic?
There are 2 comics that have ended, which I liked, which were at the time that I liked a lot at the time. I mean, and I still like them, but that are no longer running. One of them that ended not too long ago is Perry Bible Fellowship. I'm sure everyone. It's like the classic gag strip, and I think he's the best gag writer in webcomics. But and then there's this other one that I always plug. No one else knows this. No one else likes this, but it's like my favorite webcomic is. It's called Buttercup Festival, and it's just this really sort of whimsical comic about this poorly scrawled. Sort of Grim Reaper-looking character who has this weird sort of idealism about everything, and at the same time this weird sadism. And and it's really hard to describe. But he's like, I have an idea. I want to do this experiment. And he'll do things, and some of them are very, very strange things. I don't know. Narrating comics seems like it's ultimately kind of futile. But there was a part where this. There was one comic that was just about he discovered that a clutch of motherless ducklings had imprinted on him, and he's like, "Wow, this is interesting." And so he walks like through the kitchen and up across the countertop. So they walk across the frying pan, and then he turns it on, and then there's this last frame, and the last frame shows him there with some eggs and eating and pausing, and then there's like a couple of panels as he does other stuff, and then he stops and he's like, maybe that was wrong. And I don't know. But it's this great comic, and there are a couple of XKCDs that are sort of direct references to that or influences from that. It's hard to read his handwriting in the older comics. It's very scrawled, and that's. I made a script to download them all and then upsample them to like double size, so I can see them on my laptop and get a better ability to read his handwriting. And read through the archive that way. We try to make that easier. We have a JSON interface to the comics that is documented somewhere that so that people can automatically download them and do whatever they want with them. We encourage that kind of thing. Any questions?